The storm didn't fall from the sky so much as it pressed. Snow came in sideways sheets that turned streetlights into smeared halos. Wind combed the city in hard, cold strokes, shoving drifts into corners and erasing tire tracks as soon as they formed. On nights like this, the world shrank to what your headlights could prove. Officer Ethan Cole kept his speed conservative, hands steady on the wheel as the patrol SUV hummed over half-frozen asphalt. He'd been on shift for 8 hours, and the radio hadn't stopped spitting out need. Fender benders in the slush, stranded drivers, a kitchen fire that turned out to be burnt oil, and panic. Nothing glamorous, nothing cinematic, just people and weather, both equally capable of becoming dangerous when ignored. In the passenger seat, K9 Shadow sat upright, calm in a way that always looked like patience and never was. Shadow's ears were forward, eyes scanning the world beyond glass. Ethan didn't need the dog to tell him the roads were bad. He did need the dog to tell him when something else was wrong. The dispatch tone cut through the cab. Unit 12, respond, private facility request. Pine Haven Youth Recovery. Reported disruptive resident, staff requesting police assistance. Ethan glanced at the MDT. Pine Haven, a name he'd seen exactly twice, both times attached to reports that ended quickly and cleanly, like somebody preferred the paper to remain blank. Disruptive resident, vague enough to mean anything. Staff requesting assistance, specific enough to mean they wanted authority in the building, authority that wasn't theirs. He flicked the mic. Unit 12 copies, en route. Shadow's head tilted slightly, reading Ethan's shift in focus the way he read scent. Not excitement, not stress. Something quieter, caution. Pine Haven sat on the outskirts, on a hill lined with manicured trees that looked wrong under snow, too curated, too controlled. The entrance gates were wrought iron and expensive taste. The sign was backlit, the kind of glow that said privacy without needing the word. Ethan pulled up to the security booth. A young guard with a tight jaw leaned out, checking credentials like he'd been told to delay. "Police?" the guard asked, as if Ethan had materialized from the storm for entertainment. "Officer Cole, this is Shadow. We're responding to a call." The guard's eyes flicked to Shadow's vest. His posture stiffened, the subtle recoil of someone who'd heard stories about dogs that bite first and ask questions never. Shadow didn't move, didn't growl, didn't give the guard anything to react to besides presence. The gate buzzed open. Ethan drove through. The main building rose out of the snow like a resort pretending not to be a facility. Soft lighting, wide windows, a circle drive kept clear by a plow that probably ran hourly. It was a place built to reassure parents with money that their children's pain was being handled professionally. Ethan parked near the entrance and killed the engine. He opened the door, and the cold hit like a decision. Shadow exited with him, boots crunching on the salted walkway. Ethan adjusted his cap against the wind and gave Shadow a subtle hand signal, close, attentive, but not threatening. The dog matched him step for step, a silent shadow in the literal sense. Inside, warmth hit too hard, almost nauseating after the cold. The air smelled like eucalyptus and overpriced candle wax. A receptionist behind a polished desk looked up with practiced calm, her smile thin. "Officer," she said, "thank you for coming. Who called?" "Our residential supervisor. Name? Mr. Halverson." Ethan noted it without writing it down yet. He wanted to see if the name stayed consistent when repeated under pressure. "And the disruptive resident?" The receptionist's smile tightened. "One of our teens. They're having an episode." "Medical staff on site?" "Yes, of course." "Then why call police?" "We're concerned for safety. We'd like assistance." "Assistance, not intervention, not arrest, not a report. Assistance." Ethan nodded once. "Take me to them." The receptionist stood and gestured toward a corridor. As she walked, Ethan watched the environment like it might lie to him. Soft carpet, sound dampening, doors with keypads, cameras in corners, tiny black eyes that were either recording everything or nothing at all, depending on who wanted what. Shadow's gait changed. It was subtle. His head dropped half an inch, nose catching and holding. His tail didn't tuck. He didn't bristle. He did something more significant. He focused. Ethan felt it like a shift in air pressure. The receptionist didn't notice, or pretended not to. They reached a set of double doors marked Residential Wing, Authorized Personnel. The receptionist keyed in a code. As the doors clicked, Shadow's ears angled forward and his eyes locked down the hallway. Voices carried from somewhere ahead, not yelling, not the messy sound of a teen outburst. The voices sounded controlled, adult, coordinated. Ethan's instincts didn't flare, they sharpened. They turned a corner, and the scene revealed itself in a way that made the receptionist's earlier calm look like a costume. A teen in a wheelchair, no older than 16, was being moved quickly down the corridor by two staff members. One had hands on the chair handles. The other walked beside them, palm pressing the teen's shoulder like a steering wheel. The teen's face was pale, jaw clenched against panic. A metal brace on their leg caught the overhead light, and ahead of them, near a side exit, stood a man in a tailored coat with snow melting on his shoulders. His hair was perfect. His posture said he was used to people making space. Next to him hovered Mr. Halverson, Ethan assumed, smiling too hard. The teen's eyes flicked up and met Ethan's. Not relief, not hope. A raw, instinctive plea that looked like, "Don't let them take me." Shadow moved, not aggressively, just forward, one silent step that shifted the atmosphere like a blade sliding free of a sheath. His nose aimed toward the teen, toward the sleeve pulled down too far for indoors. Shadow's nostrils flared. Ethan saw it at the same moment he saw the stain, dark, small, near the cuff. Fresh blood. "Stop," Ethan said, voice steady but carrying. The staff froze like someone had hit pause. Halverson turned too quickly. "Officer, thank goodness. We're handling a—" Ethan didn't look at him yet. He looked at the teen. "Hey," Ethan said, softening his tone without losing authority. "What's your name?" The teen's mouth opened. No sound. The staff member at the handles answered instead. "We're relocating them for safety." Ethan's gaze snapped to the staffer. "I asked them." Halverson stepped in, palms out. "Officer, this is a sensitive environment. The resident is escalated." Shadow let out a single low sound. Not a growl meant to threaten, a warning meant to translate. "I know there's fear here." Ethan lifted his hand slightly. Shadow quieted instantly, but didn't relax. "Medical staff," Ethan said. "Now, I want a nurse or clinician here to assess injuries." "We already did," Halverson said too fast. "Then it'll be easy to do again." The man in the tailored coat finally spoke, voice smooth. "Officer, I'm the resident's guardian. We're transferring them off campus. This is private." Ethan's eyes met his, calm and unblinking. "Not if there's an injured minor." "They're not injured." Shadow's nose bumped lightly against the teen's sleeve. "Careful." The teen flinched like a reflex. Ethan watched that flinch and felt something cold settle into place. The receptionist hovered behind Ethan like she wanted to disappear into wallpaper. Ethan kept his voice level. "I'm not here to disrupt your operations. I'm here because staff called law enforcement. That means something happened that you want documented, unless you wanted a uniform as leverage." Halverson's smile twitched. "We simply—" Ethan stepped closer to the wheelchair, maintaining respectful distance. "Listen to me," he said to the teen. "If you're hurt, you need medical attention. If you feel unsafe, you can say that. I'm going to ask you a yes or no question." He paused, letting the teen's eyes stay on his. "Do you feel safe right now?" The teen's throat worked. Their fingers tightened around the armrest. Halverson's gaze sharpened. The staff's grip on the chair handles tightened too. Shadow stayed perfectly still, like a coiled truth. The teen whispered, barely audible. "No?" The word hit the hallway like a dropped tray, loud in its smallness. Ethan nodded once. "Okay." He turned finally to Halverson and the guardian. "Welfare check, medical evaluation. No one is transferring anyone until I confirm identity and injury status. That's not a request." The guardian's calm face hardened into something sharper. "You can't—" Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I can, and I am." Shadow's eyes never left the guardian's hands, and Ethan felt, with absolute certainty, that this call wasn't about a disruptive resident. It was about keeping a problem quiet. They moved into a small assessment room off the corridor, clean, sterile, too bright. The teen's wheelchair sat near the door, angled like they wanted to be close to escape routes. Ethan stayed in the room, insisting staff remain outside. Halverson protested until Ethan simply stared at him until his words ran out. Shadow lay down near the teen's wheels, head on his paws, but his eyes stayed up. Not sleeping, guarding. A nurse arrived with clipped politeness and a badge that read, RN. Ethan asked her name, wrote it down. He asked what time she assessed the teen earlier. She hesitated before answering. That hesitation mattered. Ethan addressed the teen directly again. "I'm Ethan. This is Shadow." Shadow lifted his head slightly, ears forward, then softened his eyes in that uncanny way dogs have that makes them seem almost human. The teen swallowed. I know." "You know?" The teen nodded once. "Small. They told me, K9 unit. If you come, don't say anything." Ethan kept his face neutral, but inside, something tightened. "Who told you that?" The teen looked at the nurse, then at Ethan, then at the closed door. Fear ping-ponged between them like a trapped bird. Ethan changed approach. Facts, not pressure. "I'm going to have the nurse look at your arm, okay?" Shadow smelled blood. "We just want to make sure you're not hurt." The teen's eyes filled, but they nodded. The nurse approached, gloved hands gentle. She rolled the teen's sleeve up. A bruise ringed the wrist like fingers had been there recently. A small cut at the inner arm still seeped, thin and fresh. The nurse's mouth tightened. She started to speak, then stopped herself as if remembering she was being watched, even in a room with the door shut. Ethan caught that, too. "Accident?" Ethan asked, letting the nurse answer if she wanted, but watching the teen's face. The nurse said, "They struck the wall earlier." The teen flinched at the lie. Ethan didn't call it out with anger. He called it out with patience. "Okay, and the bruise pattern?" "Grip," the nurse admitted softly. "Could be from restraining." Ethan nodded. "What's their name?" Halverson had said resident. The guardian had said they're mine. Ethan needed identity that wasn't possessive. The teen hesitated. "Ari," Ethan wrote it down. "Last name?" The teen's face tightened. "They changed it on my bracelet." Ethan's eyes dropped to the wristband. The printed name didn't match Ari. It was a different first name entirely. "Who changed it?" Ethan asked. Ari's voice trembled. "They said it was for paperwork, for transfer." "Transfer." Ethan kept his breathing even. He didn't let the moment become a confrontation that would spook Ari into silence. "RN," he said to the nurse, "I need your medication administration record for Ari, last 24 hours, and I want to know who signed it." The nurse's eyes darted to the door again. Ethan saw the fear there, and he understood the shape of the trap. Staff didn't need to be evil to be complicit. They just needed to be scared or paid or trained to obey the building's hierarchy. The guardian knocked once and opened the door without waiting. Ethan stepped into the doorway immediately, blocking entry with his body in a way that was non-violent but absolute. "We're done," the guardian said. "This is private. You've confirmed minor injuries. We're leaving." Ethan's tone stayed calm. "Not until identity is verified and a proper report is made. Your staff called us. That triggers documentation." Halverson slid in behind the guardian, too close, too confident. "Officer Cole, we respect your role, but you're out of your depth here. This is a clinical environment." Ethan held his gaze. "Then clinical staff won't mind transparency." The guardian's phone buzzed. He glanced down, then smiled slightly as if he'd received reinforcement. "My attorney is on the line," he said. "He'd be happy to explain your overreach." Ethan didn't blink. "He can explain it to internal affairs if he wants. Right now, you're not moving that teen." Shadow rose behind Ethan without command, silent as rising smoke, positioning himself so that if anyone pushed past Ethan, they'd meet 80 pounds of controlled consequence. Shadow didn't growl. He didn't need to. The guardian stared at Shadow, then at Ethan. "You're threatening me with a dog?" Ethan's voice was almost gentle. "I'm preventing you from moving a scared, injured minor with a mismatched identity bracelet. That's all." Halverson's smile disappeared. "You're making a serious mistake." Ethan nodded once. "Maybe." He didn't say what he was thinking. "You're the mistake, and you're counting on everyone being too polite to point it out." He turned back into the room and closed the door in their faces. In that moment, door clicked, storm pounding outside, Ari trembling in a chair that suddenly felt like a cage. Ethan understood with exact clarity. Whatever this place was calling recovery, it was also hiding something. And the moment he chose not to look away, it became his case. Ethan started with procedure because procedure was armor. He photographed Ari's wristband and the bruising with the nurse present. He wrote the timestamps. He asked for staff IDs, names, and the facility's incident report. He requested security footage from the corridor. Halverson said cameras were down due to weather interference. Ethan looked up at the camera dome in the corner, still lit, still powered. He didn't argue, he simply documented the claim. Shadow stayed close to Ari, occasionally pressing his nose against Ari's hand like an anchor. Ari's breathing slowed, millimeter by millimeter, the way panic recedes when someone finally believes you're in danger. Ethan stepped into the hallway, called his supervisor. Captain Maria Hayes answered on the second ring, her voice steady over the noise of a night that wanted to explode. "Cole." "Captain, I'm at Pine Haven. The call is not what they reported." "Explain." "Injured teen, mismatched wristband. Attempted off-campus transfer mid-incident. Staff claims cameras down. Guardian is hostile and already lawyering up." A pause that said Hayes was doing the math. Politics, resources, blowback. "Are you safe?" Hayes asked. "Yes." "Is the teen safe?" Ethan glanced through the assessment room window. Ari's hand rested on Shadow's head now. The dog was still as stone, eyes watching the door. "Not yet," Ethan said. Hayes exhaled. "You're walking into a donor hornet's nest, Ethan." "I figured." "Document everything. Do not escalate beyond policy. Do you understand me?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am." "And Cole," Hayes' voice softened the smallest amount, "if you can get the teen's identity verified and medical care secured, do it. But be smart. They'll try to make you the problem." Ethan looked down at his gloved hands. "They already are." "Then don't give them any angles." Ethan ended the call and turned back toward the assessment room. Halverson was waiting in the corridor with the Guardian and 2 security staff. The Guardian smiled, like he'd just been handed permission to be cruel. "Officer Cole," he said, "you're going to regret this." Ethan met his eyes, calm. "Maybe?" Shadow lifted his head inside the room, reading the tension through the door. Ethan thought, not for the first time, how some people mistook calm for weakness. It wasn't. Calm was how you stayed standing when the world pushed. And Ethan Cole, with Shadow at his side, had no intention of being pushed out of the truth. The call from the donor's attorney came faster than Ethan expected. He hadn't even finished uploading the preliminary incident notes to the system when his department-issued phone vibrated in his hand. Unknown number. He stepped into a quieter alcove near the lobby and answered. "Officer Cole." "Officer Cole, this is Martin Grayson, counsel for Mr. Randall Whitmore." The voice was smooth, rehearsed, confident in the way of someone accustomed to outcomes bending toward him. "I understand you're interfering with a lawful medical transfer at Pine Haven." "I'm conducting a welfare check on an injured minor," Ethan replied evenly. "You're exceeding your authority. My client is Ari's legal guardian. The facility operates under state licensure. If you obstruct this transfer, you will expose yourself and your department to substantial liability." Ethan leaned against the wall, eyes on the security desk where the receptionist pretended not to listen. "Then you can explain to a judge why an injured minor was being moved off-site with a falsified wristband and undocumented sedation." There was a fractional pause. "You're making serious allegations," Grayson said carefully. "I'm documenting facts," Ethan replied. "You're welcome to request body cam footage." Silence again. Then, "My client will be filing a formal complaint first thing in the morning." "I'll make sure it's properly routed." Ethan ended the call before Grayson could reassert dominance through volume. He returned to the assessment room. Ari's shoulders had lowered slightly. Shadow remained beside them, head up now, tracking footsteps in the hallway. The nurse handed Ethan a printout of the medication log. He scanned it. 2 sedatives logged within a 3-hour window, one signed by an LPN whose name didn't match the badge of any nurse he'd seen. The timestamps were out of sequence. "Where's this nurse now?" Ethan asked quietly. The nurse swallowed. "Off shift." "At midnight?" She didn't answer. Ethan nodded once. He'd seen enough pattern to know this wasn't improvisation. It was system. He stepped into the hallway again. Halverson had lost the curated calm. He stood rigid, jaw clenched. "You're creating unnecessary drama," Halverson said. "No," Ethan corrected. "I'm preventing unnecessary harm." The Guardian stepped forward. "You have no proof of harm." Ethan's voice remained steady. Bruising consistent with restraint. Fresh laceration. Sedatives logged without proper sequencing. Mismatched identity band. Cameras conveniently offline. "That's circumstantial?" It's enough to pause a transfer. The Guardian's composure cracked just slightly. Do you know who funds this facility? Ethan held his gaze. Does that change what's happening in that room? It changes what happens to you. There it was, not even disguised. Shadow shifted inside the room, sensing the tone change. Ethan didn't move. Captain Hayes is aware of this situation. So is dispatch. Everything is documented. Halverson's eyes narrowed. You're overplaying your hand. Ethan thought of Aries' whisper. They told me if you come, don't say anything. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Who told Ari not to talk? Halverson blinked. The Guardian looked between them. Ethan continued, still quiet. You called us. That was your mistake. You wanted a uniform to legitimize whatever you were about to do. Now you have one, and I don't legitimize harm. The hallway felt smaller. Shadow's nails clicked once against tile. Aries' voice floated faintly from inside the room. Officer? Ethan turned immediately and stepped back inside. Aries' hands trembled. They said, if I told you, I'd get transferred to a higher security campus. No phone, no outside contact. The nurse froze. Ethan crouched slightly to be eye level. Did someone threaten that tonight? Ari nodded. Who? Ari's eyes flicked toward the hallway. Ethan didn't push further. Not yet. Instead, he stood and addressed the nurse. Call EMS. I want Ari evaluated by an external medical team. Halverson burst in. That's unnecessary. Ethan didn't raise his voice. It's mandatory. You don't have authority to mandate external. I do when I suspect injury and coercion. The Guardian stepped closer, finger jabbing toward Ethan's chest. You're finished in this town. Shadow stood instantly, not lunging, not barking, but rising in perfect alignment with Ethan, positioning himself between Ari and the advancing adults. The Guardian froze mid-step. Ethan held his posture, shoulders squared, but non-aggressive. Step back, Ethan said evenly. The Guardian hesitated. Shadow's eyes locked onto him, unblinking. The Guardian stepped back. The power dynamics shifted, not violently, but undeniably. Ethan turned to the nurse. Call EMS. She did. Within 15 minutes, paramedics were in the room. Outside voices multiplied, staff whispering, security shifting uneasily. The storm outside intensified, wind rattling windows like a warning. Ari was transferred to a stretcher for examination. As they wheeled Ari down the hallway, Ethan walked beside them. Shadow stayed close, shoulder aligned with Ethan's knee. Staff eyes followed. The Guardian's expression had hardened into something calculating. Do you understand what you're doing? He asked as they passed. Yes, Ethan replied. You're destroying a reputationally critical institution based on hysteria. Ethan didn't slow. If it collapses that easily, it wasn't stable. Outside, the ambulance doors closed. Ethan watched as Ari was loaded in. The paramedic leaned out. Vitals stable, but those bruises? That's not from a wall. Ethan nodded once. Thank you. The doors shut. The ambulance pulled away into the snow. Shadow's posture eased a fraction. But the case was only beginning. By morning, the pressure campaign had started. Formal complaint filed. Allegations of harassment. Allegations that Ethan had weaponized a K-9 in a clinical setting. Internal Affairs flagged the incident for review. Captain Maria Hayes called him into her office before noon. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. Sit, she said. Ethan sat. Shadow lay at his feet. You did everything by policy, Hayes began. Yes, ma'am. But this is political dynamite. Pine Haven has board members tied to city funding initiatives. The donor in question bankrolls half the youth programs in this district. I'm aware. You're being accused of intimidating staff and interfering with medical operations. I requested external medical confirmation. That's standard. Hayes nodded. It is. But they're not arguing standard. They're arguing optics. Ethan didn't answer. Hayes leaned forward. I'm ordering you to disengage from direct contact with Pine Haven. You will not return to that facility unless explicitly reassigned. Ethan's jaw tightened. Understood, he said. You may continue documenting. You may coordinate with Detective Chen in Cyber and Juvenile. But you will not freelance. I don't freelance. Hayes' mouth twitched faintly. I know. A pause. Off the record? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Something stinks. But if you push too hard too fast, they'll make you the story, and that protects them. Ethan nodded slowly. "So we move smart," he said. Hayes met his eyes. "We move smart." Dr. Lena Moore arrived at the precinct that afternoon with printed photos. "I reviewed the paramedic documentation," she said, setting the file down. "The bruising pattern on Aries' wrist is consistent with forceful grip, not accidental impact." "Sedatives?" Ethan asked. "Blood panel pending, but the log inconsistencies alone justify investigation." Shadow lay quietly under the table, ears flicking at voices outside the conference room. "Transfers?" Ethan asked. Moore nodded. "I cross-referenced Pine Haven discharge data. In the past year, 7 teens were transferred within 48 hours of filing internal complaints." "Where to?" "Facilities owned by the same parent holding company." Ethan leaned back slightly. "A pipeline," he said. "Yes." Moore slid another document across the table. "And this phrase appears in multiple incident reports. Weather-related camera outage." Identical wording. Ethan's eyes hardened. Shadow's tail thumped once, sensing the shift in Ethan's internal temperature. The problem wasn't one scared teen, it was infrastructure. Deputy Lucas Reed joined them later that evening. Reed was younger, sharper around the edges, but observant. "I pulled service gate access logs," Reed said. "Night Airy was almost transferred. A vehicle left 10 minutes before your arrival." "Registered to?" Ethan asked. "Shell company tied to Whitmore Holdings." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Off-site property?" he asked. Reed nodded. "Old counseling annex, not currently listed as active." Moore inhaled slowly. "If they're moving teens there before formal transfer, they can control documentation." Ethan's mind clicked through the sequence. Sedate, reband, transfer, rewrite. Shadow shifted at his feet. Ethan stood. "Where's the annex?" he asked. Reed slid a map across the table. 10 miles north. Snow still falling, storm still thick. Hayes' order echoed in Ethan's mind. "Do not freelance." But Hayes had also said, "Document, move smart." Ethan picked up his coat. "We coordinate," he said. "No rush, no breach, we confirm." Reed nodded. Moore's eyes were steady. "Be careful." Shadow rose without command. They stepped out into the storm. The annex property looked abandoned from the road, lights low, drive unplowed except for a recent set of tire tracks cutting through fresh snow. Shadow exited the SUV and immediately lowered his nose. He moved toward the side of the building, tail level, posture alert but not agitated. Ethan followed at controlled pace. Reed stayed slightly behind, hand near but not on his holster. Shadow stopped near a side door. He sat, alert, not barking, just confirming. Ethan's pulse slowed instead of spiking. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. After 30 seconds, the door cracked open. A staffer, young, pale, looked out. "We're closed." "Police," Ethan said calmly. "We need to speak inside." The staffer hesitated. Shadow remained seated, eyes locked. The staffer swallowed. "We're not operational." Ethan gestured lightly toward the tire tracks. "Someone is." A flicker of fear. Then the staffer stepped aside. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and something else. Fear layered under bleach. A hallway. A closed door at the end. Muffled movement. Ethan moved forward slowly, no weapon drawn, no raised voice, just presence. He opened the door. Inside, 2 teens sat on cots. One looked up with red-rimmed eyes. The other stared blankly. On a desk nearby sat paperwork labeled Emergency Behavioral Transfer. Blank fields waiting for a narrative. Shadow stood at Ethan's side, silent. Witness. Ethan looked at the teens. "You're safe," he said. The words felt small, but they were true. Captain Hayes' call came as Ethan stepped back into the hallway. "You're at the annex," she said. "Yes, ma'am." A pause. "You just made this impossible to bury." Ethan looked through the window at the teens on the cots. "That was the idea." Hayes exhaled. "Then we do this clean. Reed stays. I'm sending juvenile and a warrant team. No heroics." "Yes, ma'am." Shadow leaned into Ethan's leg briefly, not seeking reassurance, giving it. Ethan scratched behind his ear once. "We're not done," Ethan murmured quietly to the dog. Shadow's tail flicked. Outside, the storm continued. But inside that annex, something else had shifted. The pipeline had been seen, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. The warrant team arrived like a change in weather, quiet at first, then suddenly everywhere. 2 unmarked SUVs and a patrol unit rolled into the lot with lights off, tires crunching snow instead of sirens slicing the night. The scene stayed controlled, professional, almost clinical. Captain Maria Hayes stepped out wearing a heavy coat over her uniform, breath steaming in the dark. Behind her, 2 juvenile officers, 1 investigator from the county DA's office, and a tech with a camera rig. Hayes didn't look at Ethan right away. She surveyed the building, doorways, windows, the tire tracks, the weak security lights, and then she turned. "You okay?" she asked, voice low. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes flicked to Shadow, then back to Ethan. "I'm not asking about your pulse. I'm asking if you're thinking clearly." Ethan held her gaze. "Crystal." That earned the smallest nod. "Good," she said, "because this is where people make mistakes, the kind that let monsters walk." Reed was already posting at the hallway intersection, keeping the staffer in view without escalating. The young staffer looked like he wanted to disappear through the drywall. Hayes motioned for Ethan and Reed to follow. Inside, the annex felt even colder now that more bodies were in it, cold not from temperature, but from the sense that this place was designed to stop time. A holding pattern. A pause button on someone's life until paperwork caught up with intention. The 2 teens in the room watched the new arrivals with the guarded expression of kids who had learned that adults in uniforms didn't always mean safety. Ethan kept his voice steady. "You're not in trouble. Nobody here is here for you. We're here for whoever put you here." One of the teens, a boy, maybe 15, blinked rapidly. We didn't do anything." "I know," Ethan said. The other teen, a girl with bruising near her jawline, stared at the camera tech and flinched. Dr. Lena Moore entered behind the team, wearing a simple coat and gloves, carrying a sealed evidence kit. She didn't crowd. She stayed at the edge, reading the room like a scientist reads an organism, carefully, respectfully, without contamination. Hayes turned to the DA investigator. "We secure, we document. Nobody touches anything without gloves. Every second of video footage gets logged with timestamps." The investigator nodded. Then Hayes looked at Ethan. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Ethan walked them through it. Door, staffer, hallway, room, teens, transfer paperwork. He pointed to the papers on the desk. "Blank fields, emergency behavioral transfer. No signatures, no physician, no facility letterhead. It's a template." The DA investigator's face tightened. Moore stepped forward and with gloved hands leaned close to the desk without moving anything. "Smell that," she said quietly to Hayes. Hayes leaned in. A faint chemical scent, not strong enough to burn, but distinct. "Sedative residue?" Hayes asked. "Possibly," Moore said. "We'll test surfaces. If this is where they stabilize kids before moving them out, there will be trace evidence." The boy on the cot whispered, "They gave us something. Said it would help us calm down. I didn't want it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Did you sign anything?" The boy shook his head violently. "No, they just—" He stopped, eyes darting to the staffer. Hayes's gaze followed. "Separate him," she told Reed. "Different room. He doesn't talk in front of someone who might be part of this." Reed nodded and guided the staffer into the hallway. Not rough, not aggressive, but firm enough that the staffer understood he no longer controlled the narrative. In the doorway, Shadow remained still, ears forward, eyes tracking, watching both worlds at once. The quiet room wasn't labeled. It never was. It was down a side hallway behind a door that looked like storage. No signage, no warning, no visible purpose. The girl pointed with trembling hand. "That one." Hayes gestured to the tech. "Roll camera." Reed positioned himself near the door. Ethan stood slightly to Hayes's right, Shadow to his left. Shadow's posture was alert but restrained, as if he could feel the gravity of what was behind that door. Hayes took out her flashlight and opened it. The air that came out was stale and warmer than the hallway, thick with the smell of sweat trapped too long. The room was small, no windows, padded walls, a drain in the floor, and on one wall a series of deep scratches as if someone had tried to carve their way out. Moore didn't speak. She didn't need to. The DA investigator's face blanched. Hayes's voice was quiet, but it was a quiet with teeth. "This is not a therapeutic tool," she said. "This is a prison cell." Ethan saw Reed's hands tighten into fists. Shadow stepped forward one pace and stopped, nose lifting. He sniffed once, then stiffened, ears angled sharply, body too still. Ethan knew that posture. It meant something was present that shouldn't be. "Shadow," Ethan whispered. "Show me." Shadow moved to the far corner and sat. He stared at the floor. Then he looked up at Ethan. The look wasn't dramatic. It was simple. "Here." Moore crouched carefully. "There's a seam," she said. The tech leaned in, camera focused. Under the padded wall corner, the edge of a panel, slightly loose. Reed knelt and, with gloved hands, lifted it. Inside was a bundle of fabric. A hoodie, a sweatshirt, small, teen-sized, and tucked inside the hoodie pocket. A phone. Moore's eyes narrowed. "That's contraband," Ethan's voice stayed calm. "Or evidence." Hayes's gaze hardened. "Bag it." The next morning, Pine Haven's leadership arrived at the precinct with attorneys and outrage. Not sorrow, not concern. Outrage. They demanded to know why police had entered a private facility without medical oversight. They demanded to know why a service dog was allowed near vulnerable youth. They demanded to know why patients were interviewed without guardian consent. Hayes let them talk. Then she placed a photo of the quiet room on the table. Silence hit like a blunt object. One attorney cleared his throat. "That appears to be a behavioral de-escalation room." Hayes didn't blink. "Then you can explain the drain." Another attorney tried to recover. "Many facilities use—" Hayes placed a second photo, scratches on the wall. "And you can explain those." The room stayed quiet. Ethan sat beside Hayes, hands folded, listening, watching. Shadow wasn't in the meeting room. He was in Ethan's peripheral world, waiting outside with Reed as policy required. But Ethan could still feel him, like an anchor line. Pine Haven's director, Halverson, stared at the photos and then looked away, as if refusing to see could reverse reality. "We will be conducting an internal review," Halverson said stiffly. Hayes's voice was calm. "Your past internal review." One attorney leaned forward, voice sharpened. "Captain Hayes, with respect, your department is risking significant liability. There are protocols for—" Hayes held up her hand. "No," she said. "What you mean is there are protocols for keeping people like you safe, and those protocols just failed." The attorney's face tightened. Hayes slid the sealed evidence log across the table. "We have witness statements from multiple minors. We have suspicious medication documentation. We have transfer paperwork templates. We have an off-site annex operating without clear licensure. And we have a restraint room that violates any ethical standard I've ever seen." She leaned forward. "Now," Hayes continued, "you can cooperate, or you can be the next headline." By evening, the local news had wind of a police investigation into questionable youth transfers. They didn't have details yet, but the rumor alone was a flare in the sky. Phones began ringing. Parents began asking questions. Former staff began searching their consciences for what they'd ignored. And somewhere, in an office Ethan couldn't see, someone decided the easiest way to stop the bleeding was to destroy the person holding pressure on the wound. Ethan was called into internal affairs. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. The IA office smelled like cold coffee and clean paper. Two investigators sat across from Ethan. A recorder sat on the table. "Officer Cole," one investigator began, "we're reviewing a complaint regarding your conduct at Martha's Diner." Ethan's brow tightened slightly. "Martha's Diner? You were present at a disturbance involving a minor in a wheelchair and several teenage boys. A complaint alleges you—" He checked notes. "Used intimidation tactics and threatened a civilian." Ethan exhaled slowly, controlled. This was it, the pivot. They couldn't attack the quiet room yet, not directly. Too risky, too visible. So they attacked him. "Name of complainant?" Ethan asked. The investigator hesitated. "It's sealed." Ethan understood that, too. It meant the complainant mattered, or at least their money did. The investigator continued. "Additionally, there is a concern that your K-9 partner, Shadow, was used in a manner inconsistent with policy." Ethan's voice stayed even. "Shadow did not bite anyone. Shadow did not lunge. Shadow was positioned defensively." The investigator's pen scratched. "But witnesses report feeling threatened." Ethan met his eyes. Bullies often feel threatened when consequences enter the room. They asked about the diner, about his tone, about whether he used military intimidation, about whether he identified himself as a law enforcement officer, about whether he directed the actions of a business employee. Ethan answered truthfully. Then the second investigator leaned forward. "Officer Cole," she said, "have you ever been evaluated for trauma-related stress?" Ethan felt the trap closing. He kept his face neutral. "No." "Why not?" "Because I haven't required it." She nodded as if that was the wrong answer. "Have you ever experienced hypervigilance in civilian settings?" Ethan didn't blink. "I maintain situational awareness as part of my job. Do you see how that could be interpreted as aggressive?" Ethan's voice stayed flat. "No." The investigator's eyes narrowed slightly, and Ethan realized something cold and clean. They weren't investigating to learn. They were investigating to label, to frame, to make the hero into the threat. When Ethan left the IA office, Reed was waiting in the hallway, expression tight. "They're fishing," Reed muttered. Ethan nodded once. "Let them." Reed looked at him. "How are you so calm?" Ethan's gaze drifted briefly toward the far end of the hallway, where Shadow waited beside a bench, posture relaxed but alert. "Because I've seen what panic does," Ethan said quietly, "and I've seen what steady does." Reed swallowed. "They're coming for you." Ethan's voice didn't change. "Then they'll have to come through the truth." That night, Dr. Lena Moore called Ethan. Her tone was different, not analytical, urgent. "They found Ari's blood work," she said. Ethan's stomach tightened. "And? High levels of a sedative not documented in Pinehaven's logs." Ethan closed his eyes once. "Which means?" "It means someone drugged Ari," Moore said, "without proper medical oversight." Ethan's jaw clenched. Shadow lifted his head at the shift in Ethan's breathing. Moore continued, "Ethan, if this becomes public, Pinehaven will burn, and whoever arranged it will do everything they can to control the narrative." Ethan's voice was low. "They already started." Moore hesitated. "Then we need to move faster." Ethan stared out at the snow-lit street beyond his apartment window. He knew what faster meant. It meant risk, it meant pressure, it meant stepping into the part of the storm that could swallow you. But there was no safe path left, not when miners were being sedated and moved like cargo. "Tell Hayes," Ethan said. "I already did," Ethan nodded. "Then we document everything, every call, every threat, every missing camera." Moore's voice softened. "And you protect yourself." Ethan almost laughed. Protecting himself had never been the point. But he understood what she meant. If he fell, the case could be buried with him. "I will," he said. And then he looked down at Shadow, who watched him with that steady, knowing gaze. "We will," Ethan corrected. Shadow's tail thumped once. The blow didn't come in a courtroom. It came in the parking lot behind the precinct. Ethan was walking Shadow to the vehicle after a late shift when he noticed a black sedan idling near the far fence line. No markings. Windows tinted. Engine running. Ethan slowed. Shadow's posture changed instantly. Ears forward, head angled, a subtle stiffening that signaled focus. The sedan didn't move, but the passenger window lowered an inch, just enough to show a man's mouth and chin. "Officer Cole," the man said, voice casual, "you're stubborn." Ethan stopped at a safe distance. He didn't approach. He didn't draw. He simply stood. "What do you want?" Ethan asked. The man chuckled softly. "To offer you an off-ramp, drop the annex, drop Pinehaven. Let the lawyers handle whatever misunderstanding occurred. You'll get a commendation for a quick response, and everybody goes back to sleep." Ethan's voice was quiet. "Ari was drugged." The man sighed like he was disappointed Ethan had spoken out of turn. "People make mistakes. Facilities get busy." "Drugging a miner isn't a mistake," Ethan said. Shadow's body remained aligned with Ethan's leg. Not pulling, not barking, but radiating controlled warning. The man's voice lowered. "Listen carefully. If you keep pushing, you'll lose Shadow." Ethan's entire body went still. The threat didn't land on his career. It landed on his partner. "You can't do that," Ethan said, voice flat. The man chuckled. "You think the system can't find a policy violation? An incident? A failure to control? Dogs get reassigned all the time, officer. You'd be amazed how quickly it happens when paperwork moves." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Who are you?" he asked. The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was a message. "Last chance," the man said. "Walk away." Ethan took a slow breath. Then he spoke with a calm that felt like ice. "No?" The window slid up. The sedan rolled away into the night like it had never existed. Shadow didn't move until it disappeared. Then he looked up at Ethan. Ethan knelt and placed a hand on Shadow's neck. "Good," Ethan murmured. "Good boy." But the warmth in his voice didn't erase the cold in his spine. They'd drawn a line, and the other side had responded by aiming at the only thing Ethan trusted more than himself. Ethan didn't go home. He drove straight to Captain Hayes's house. It was late, snow still falling. Hayes opened the door in sweats and a heavy hoodie, eyes sharp, even half asleep. "Talk," she said, stepping aside. Ethan told her about the sedan, about the offer, about the threat against Shadow. Hayes listened without interruption. When Ethan finished, Hayes's face went very still. "Okay," she said. "That's not just pressure," Ethan said. "That's intimidation." Hayes nodded. "And now it's my problem, too." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You're not scared?" Hayes gave a humorless smile. "I'm terrified, but fear doesn't get a vote." She grabbed her phone. "Reed," she said when he answered, "get to the station, now. Bring the logs, bring the camera footage, everything." Then she hung up and looked at Ethan. "We're going public," she said. Ethan's stomach tightened. "That's risky." "It's already risky," Hayes replied. "The question is whether we let them control the story." Ethan thought of Ari, of the quiet room, of the phone hidden in the padding, of the kids on the cots. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. The next 24 hours unfolded like a controlled detonation. Hayes contacted the county DA directly, bypassing layers that could be compromised. Moore delivered the blood work results in person. Reed pulled access logs and vehicle plate captures from a nearby traffic camera. Grainy, but something. And the phone recovered from the quiet room? It became the match, because it wasn't just a teen's phone, it contained videos. Short clips taken in secret, whispered, shaky, terrified, footage of staff yelling, footage of teens crying, footage of someone in scrubs saying, "You'll be transferred if you talk." And in one clip, brief but clear, a man's voice. "Whitmore doesn't tolerate problems." Ethan watched the clip once, then again. Then he paused it and stared at the frame. It wasn't proof of everything, but it was proof of enough. The press conference happened outside the courthouse steps, not flashy, not theatrical, but firm. Hayes stood at the mic with the DA at her side. Ethan stood behind her with Shadow in full K9 vest, calm and steady. Reed and Moore stood a few feet back. The cameras rolled. Hayes spoke plainly. An investigation into unlawful transfers, possible sedation without oversight, and evidence of coercion. The DA confirmed warrants were being executed. Then the reporters started shouting questions. "Is this connected to a wealthy donor?" Hayes didn't flinch. "Money doesn't exempt anyone from investigation." "Are you accusing Pine Haven of abuse?" Hayes's voice remained steady. "We are documenting and investigating credible allegations." "Officer Cole, are you the whistleblower?" Ethan didn't step forward. Hayes didn't let them turn him into the headline. She kept the focus where it belonged, the miners. And in that moment, Ethan understood what real leadership looked like. Not protecting the institution, protecting the vulnerable. Within a week, the annex was shut down. Within 2, Pine Haven's license was suspended, pending investigation. Within 3, state investigators arrived, then federal. The donors' attorneys released statements about misunderstandings and political motivations. But the phone videos had already found their way into the world. And the world doesn't forget what it sees when a child whispers, "Please don't leave me here." Ari was placed with a verified advocate. A caseworker was assigned. A restraining order was filed against the guardian pending review. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't clean, but it was movement. And movement was life. Ethan still had internal affairs hanging over him, still had whispers in the hallways, still had officers who avoided eye contact because they didn't want to be adjacent to controversy. But he also had something else. He had parents calling the precinct not to complain, but to thank. He had one staffer from the annex, Henry the custodian, who left a note on the front desk. "You did what nobody else did. You didn't look away." Ethan didn't keep many notes, but he kept that one. On a quiet night, weeks later, Ethan and Shadow stood outside the same diner where it started, Martha's, watching snow drift through streetlight. The world looked ordinary again, which was always the most dangerous thing, because ordinary is where people hide rot. Captain Hayes joined him, hands in pockets. "Still here," she said. Ethan nodded. "Always?" Hayes glanced at Shadow. "They tried to scare you by threatening your partner." Ethan's mouth tightened. They picked the wrong leverage. Hayes's eyes softened slightly. You know they'll try again. I know. She studied him for a moment. Do you regret it? She asked. Ethan looked down at Shadow. Shadow looked back, steady, loyal, expressive, even in silence. No, Ethan said. I regret that it was necessary. Hayes nodded once. Same. They stood together for a few breaths. Then Hayes spoke quietly. Ethan, there will be a next case. Ethan's gaze stayed on the snow. I know, Hayes's voice was firm. And when it comes, when the system tries to make you the problem again, you call me before you act. Ethan nodded. Yes, ma'am. Hayes turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, she said, you reminded this department what its job actually is. She walked away. Ethan watched her go. Then he looked at Shadow. Shadow's tail flicked once. Ethan crouched and pressed his forehead briefly to Shadow's. Not for luck, for grounding. For the next one, Ethan murmured. Shadow's ears angled forward. Ready. Protecting the vulnerable isn't a moment of heroism. It's a daily choice to confront systems that profit from silence, even when they try to punish the people who refuse to look away.